Right. Here we are, episode number 99. 99. The next episode will be 100. I'm going to be honest and tell you, I cannot even believe that there are 99 episodes of this podcast. Started just a couple years ago on a whim. As I was telling tonight's guest, selfishly, I started the podcast because I wanted to talk to people who are much smarter than me in this work. And that's how it came about, right? I just wanted to have conversations with people around trauma-informed work, healing-centered work, whatever you want to identify it as, to learn. As a principal, I wanted to learn, and I've had the brilliant privilege of learning from so many amazing people on this podcast, and providing this resource to so many thousands of people across the world who listen very regularly. So thank you for doing that. And speaking of podcasts, you all, before we jump in tonight, I'm going to tell you about a new podcast that I'm going to be launching here in the next few weeks. And I'm going to try not to have any precipitation from my eyes, but it might come because it's very close to me and I'm very emotional about it. I don't share a lot about this in my life, but it is a very important part of my life. My dad was drafted and wounded in Vietnam, and it was a major life event that has now, I understand, has impacted all of us, right? That intergenerational transmission of trauma is a real thing. And just a few months ago, I was at his house and I was helping him clean out his garage, and I found this box, and I opened up this box and it was full of letters between he and my mom, who has passed away a few years ago. Between him and his parents, I found telegrams from the federal government from when he was wounded. I found letters from his uncle who met him in Germany, where they shipped him after he was wounded. I found newspaper articles about him and how he was part of a platoon of 500 people and only 15 survived. And so I went through all of this treasure trove of documentation, and it hit me that I do not know my dad before trauma. I don't know my dad pre-PTSD. And so he has only told me his story of trauma one time. And interesting enough, we're going to be talking to some experts in this field tonight, but he had so much pent up trauma that as he told this story for the one and only time I heard it, he actually put his fist down and broke a podium with the amount of trauma he was holding in his body. And I will tell you, I don't even recall all the details of the story because it was so intense, and he's never spoken to me again about it. And so I talked to him. I said, Dad, listen, this is part of our healing journey as a family, but this could be a part of a healing journey for thousands, if not millions of people across the globe who have been impacted by being a military family. And I remember when I started this work, I didn't even think I had been impacted by trauma. When I looked at the ACE score and then I realized, wow, the more I step back, the more I have convinced myself at this point that all of this work has brought me to this point of where I'm about to embark on with my father. And it's called healing, right? It's him healing, me healing, my brothers, my family healing, around what happened to him. And we all know the book, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. I'm going to be referring to this a lot, right? Because it's really about not ignoring what happened, but walking through it in a relational way to ensure healing can come out on the other side. So stay tuned to that podcast. The title of the podcast is Leave the Light On, a story of war and a battle of resilience. And I have an amazing artist friend. He's a musician and singer, a very successful songwriter, who wrote a song called Leave the Light On. And as soon as I heard the song, it resonated with me. And so I asked him, hey, can I use your song? So that'll be the song we're going to use as the podcast. And it's going to launch here in the next couple weeks. We're going to really record one episode at a time. and release one episode, record the next episode, because this is heavy conversation that my dad and I, to be quite honest, have never had. And he is now willing and said, I'm going to have it. So stay tuned on that, you all. That doesn't have to do with trauma-informed education, but I will tell you, this podcast has led me to this new podcast, which I am both nervously excited about, because I know that's going to be a lot of emotion, and a lot on the other side of that, a lot of healing. So stay tuned for that, you all. But anyway, tonight on this 99th episode of the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, we have two guests from the same organization and from the same family. So Katie and Halley are sisters and co-workers. They're partners with the Neurosequential Network in coordinating the NME Trainer Program, which is the Neurosequential Model of Education Trainer Program, and co-directors of a nonprofit organization called Educational Access Group. Halley is a former teacher. Katie hails from the public health sector, and their work supports schools, educators, and youth serving organizations in sustainability, implementing the NME and brain-based approaches across their buildings and systems through the S.I.T.E, S-I.T.E framework, which we'll learn more about. They are passionate about infusing trauma-informed practices into schools and organizations, classrooms, and sports, right? In sports. So we'll talk about that. But welcome, Katie and Halley, to the podcast. Tell us a little bit more about you, if you do not mind.
Of course. Thanks for having us, and congrats on your 99th episode. That is
and the new podcast.
amazing.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
To listen. I'm Katie. I'm the older of the two sisters, so I'll go first. But just to briefly kind of give you our backstory, I come from public health, like you said, but have always worked in the intersection between public health and education. So couldn't decide if I wanted to be a teacher or be in public health. So I merged the two. And also have always coached and loved sports. So a lot of those things you've listed pull all my passions together. But when our work together started was really, Halley was teaching and I was working on my dissertation. And in public health, one of the big pushes was we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's so many good things out there, but a lot of things live in research or academia and we don't see it get into practice. And so Halley and I kind of put our heads together and said, how can we help bring this to the classroom? How do we be those translators, not the inventors? And so through that sort of conversation, Halley can talk about a little bit more of the story of that, but we ended up partnering, piloting a model, like you said, to bring this work into classrooms and school buildings to promote sustainability and help it live beyond that one champion. And the rest is history. And we've graciously, been welcomed by the Neurosequential Network to support the Neurosequential Model in education. And it's been an absolute joy for us. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah. Katie made that sound, I feel like, eloquent, that we sat down and creatively thought about her dissertation together, but it was much more chaotic than that. Being codependent sisters like we were living together at the time. And as many educators know, we don't leave our work at school, right? I came home and did more work and thought about my students and sent emails about my students and then did other things with my students wholly in mind. And so Katie was on the receiving end of a lot of that processing. And I worked at a phenomenal school with amazing staff and an amazing community, but it was very impacted. And this specific group of students was showing up with a lot that had nothing to do with reading or math or Colorado history. And I just really felt like, what am I missing? I didn't go to graduate school that long ago. I felt like a pretty decent teacher, but I felt like there was something I wasn't touching, or some days I would do something I thought was going to be beneficial and it would blow up. And so I would vent about that to Katie, or as I always joke, crying into my wine to Katie after work. And she's like, this really connects to my work and my studies in adverse childhood experiences, because, things happen and they show up in ways we don't expect. And I said, yeah, I really think that's what's it. And there's just not a way for me to vocalize or even necessarily put into words that because of what I know is going on with, little Halley at home, that's why she's struggling in this setting, without making it sound like I was making excuses or lowering the bar for certain students. But it was also showing up very much in our school-wide data as you know, certain populations of students showing up in our data very disproportionately to our school population as a whole. And, pockets of my students who I just felt like weren't able to be successful in certain settings, even though I knew what they were capable of. And so through that, we found the Neurosequential Network, the content of Dr. Bruce Perry, and the amazing Steve Grainer, who helped walk us through it. And I always joke this was the clouds parting and the sun coming through on me as an educator. And it was, it wasn't like I realized this is everything I've been doing wrong. It was very much like, that's why that works. That's why that matters. So a lot of the things that I innately did because of my personality, I was now able to, instead of being like, this is a Halley thing, I was able to say, hey, I think this works with little so-and-so because ... And so I think that's what we loved about it was this content base in specific, or in particular, it didn't feel, like it was someone's opinion. And I was very much that teacher in a professional development who, if I felt like this was opinion based, or if I couldn't picture the presenter being in front of a room with 34 students, I kind of checked out, or I looked for holes, which I'm not proud of. But the science behind this, there was no holes, and it allowed me to still be me as a teacher, but it explained a lot. And we always say it allowed us to take great teachers and understand them instead of just attributing it to that like kid magic, which I still wholly believe exists.
I mean, to be quite honest, public health and educator combination is like an amazing combination. Seriously. And I spent 2 years working for a nonprofit, right? Looking at cross community organizing through cross-sector collaborations, through both public health, through education, through faith-based, through business. And the more I learn about the power of public health, right? And getting that point of view in, especially in education, is imperative. And ironically, one of the quintessential team members of my social and emotional health team was my school nurse, who brought a public health perspective. That would be, she understood the tummy aches, right? And the impact of stress. She understood that she had been in the school for over 25 years. She understood the neighborhood. She understood all the gaps that were missing from a public health standpoint. So, I mean, I have to say, you all are like the potential dynamic duo of like superhero material of public health and educators. I'm just saying, I mean, because it is a great combination. And if you could find one more person, if you could find an occupational therapist to get in with you all.
Gosh.
Like, I don't know if you have another sibling or you have a really close friend. You can be like, we need one more to make the trifecta of like the super trio of change the world. But I'm telling you, that would be the amazing combination of the trifecta if you had that.
That's what I'm going to be when I grow up, is an occupational therapist.
In her next life.
In my next life, I think they are.
I mean, it's not too late. To start another degree at all ever. Anyways, so tell us a little bit more about that. You mentioned Dr. Bruce Perry. Most people especially who listen to here, know the power of Dr. Perry's work, and he's been on here twice, and I'm constantly referring to all of his books that are over here. But talk about the neurosequential model just in a kind of umbrella way of what is the neurosequential model? When you say that, and the network, right? What is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the network, I think, is one of the biggest pieces. So it's a worldwide network of both clinical, educational, sports-based, community-based individuals across the world who have really come to be trained through Dr. Perry's content. And I think, one thing I'll highlight about that is that Dr. Perry, he's a neuroscientist. He's done many years of research. He has all these amazing case studies. He has all this expertise, and yet he puts it into these sort of digestible doses that, me from public health, Halley from education, other people in other lanes can really pick up and say, that's right. That's what that means, or that's what that feels like. And so the neurosequential model in therapeutics was the first lane that the Neurosequential Network, filled. They worked with clinicians, and that was their beginning. They were originally the Child Trauma Academy, but the Neurosequential Network then added on the Neurosequential Model in education through, Steve Grainer, who Haley mentioned, and Dr. Perry, who really heard from educators. We need this too. We have these students in our classrooms. We have ourselves in our classrooms. And so, I think that's sort of like the umbrella of it. And as you said, there's now sport, there's other pieces, but individuals can enroll, they can go through different levels of training, and then, equip themselves with more knowledge, align their language to others across the globe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because sometimes I feel like when we're talking about some of the concepts, you're almost tempted to be like, it's not rocket science. And then you're like, but it is.
No, it is.
It is neuroscience,
it is
right?
brain science.
And so I think that's the magic of it, is that Dr. Perry was able to take such, deeply scientific content and put it into terms that connects to all of us, but also doesn't like simplify it or make it over emotional. Or I think we rarely even use the word trauma informed. We just talk brain based because depending on your connotation of trauma informed, he's even made it so that it's performance based, it's trauma informed, it's healing, it's how to behave in the grocery store, during a holiday rush. And so I think that is just the power of it, is just its accessibility. And I also think one of the big focuses of the Neurosequential Network is the thoughtfulness behind making it empowering. So the goal of it is always to sort of work the network out of it because it's educated someone in the school. So it's all about this like authentic empowering of teachers in schools. So not outside organizations, not, this one day professional development, but like teachers who do the work, who know the work, who speak the language of their community, being empowered, being offered sort of this platform and this knowledge to explain what they already know in a lot of ways. And so I think for me that, the teacher in me was like, this is so respectful of us because it's not external in the sense that it has to come from someone else.
And there's power in that. There is definitely power in that. And, I think one of the things that I love about the Trauma Informed Educators Network, and by the way, I have been toying with renaming this podcast, and it's just been listened to by so many people. I'm going to be honest, it's selfish, you all. I'm like, because it really is centered. Oh my goodness, my brain just paused, and I will not edit that out because that's real life, you all. That really just happened. Healing centered work, right? And I've even Catherine Manning's book, The Empathetic Workspace or Workplace, right? Like empathy driven, because it's so many things. But the power of what I just heard is it's from within, right? You're building people's capacity from in schools. And I like you, Haley, is yes, I almost said Halley. Haley was that when I go to PD, I'm like, have you done this? And now, to be quite honest, it's why I went back into a school district 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Because I felt like, you know what? Even 2 years ago, I had 2 years of principal recovery. I stepped out, worked at the nonprofit, and then I'm back, right? Even 2 years ago doesn't have context of today. That the complexities of what I'm seeing in schools and this, this whole complexity of active shooter drills and social media and political division and all these things are playing such a major role on our students. That it is, and the pandemic, that happened. Also, just a couple years, it's still happening, right? I mean, we're seeing these impacts. So to hear from educators and building their efficacy for themselves and building the efficacy for their buildings of saying, hey, this is something we can do now, and here's how we're already doing it, and here's how we can tweak it to make it even better. Yeah. To me is awe-inspiring, because I agree this work has to come from, now I say us, the educators in the work, doing it on the daily basis, because I'm right there with you. If you haven't been cussed out, you haven't had something thrown at you, and you haven't been spit on, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about it unless you can tell me that those things happen, because all of those happened to me within the matter of 48 hours when I was a principal. So I feel that. And Joe Brummer, I see your comment, buddy. He's a great friend of mine. I hate the healing center. It's more healing trauma. I agree. It's also about preventing trauma too, right? Sometimes we're not healing what what we're doing, right? What we're doing can be traumatic. And I push schools all the time, and I mentioned it on this podcast. I'm really kind of exhausted by hearing about what's happening to kids at home when we're unwilling to look what's happening to them at school. We can't point outside when we have things going on inside. And a lot of people don't like to talk about what we got going on inside, but we're all working through the process, right? So what does this look like in a school? When you say, we support teachers, what does it look? What's the process look like with the trainings and things? How do people learn more?
Yeah. I mean, I will say that the NME training is pretty standardized, and there's a lot of new pieces coming out, which is exciting. There's a new platform. There's some new materials. So I think, like you said, we can't sort of live in 20 years ago. Every year there's new developments and
absolutely
amazing things happening. So there's basically the NME training itself is a 11-month process that educators enroll in. They go through monthly modules. They connect with other educators to process, to present, to practice. I think one of the biggest pieces is getting comfortable with the language and content, because it's one thing to hear Dr. Perry give an example from his life, but then, I always joke that I'm the worst with on-the-fly examples, because people are like, when and how would that have ever happened?
Weird.
You need to be able to say, which means this in our school building, or is a good recommendation for this space. So you do some of that practice. And you become connected to a network that you can stay engaged in ongoing monthly to continue that growth and education. Because I think when you finish that training, you have one level of comfort and competency with your own learning, but then that next phase is bringing it to your staff, your coworkers, and that's a whole nother learning journey.
And that's where we come in with the S.I.T.E framework, and that is really sort of supporting that implementation piece. So our goal truly in our work as a nonprofit is to work ourselves out of a job. So we support the school in getting, one to as many as they can fund NME trainers, support them through that training, help them develop, we call them our core teams within the school that involve both the NME trainers as well as just a team of champions within the building, try to get as many sort of different voices at that table as we can. A lot of support around data. I think that can oftentimes be a largely unclear or missing piece when we think about this work, because it's hard to capture. But as teachers, we all know often a big part of our work is doing key informant interviews with schools, and teachers will tell you, I know it's changed because I can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to make quantitative data and have them submit it for a grant or get the district to change their school rating because they can feel it. But we know that the students can feel it and the community can feel it as well. But our work is really adult-based, right? It's adult learning, adult change, helping to keep great teachers in the classroom, trying to impact that burnout. And so then also supporting those NME trainers and offering that PD and support to their own staff. A lot of our work, we joke, is the Home Depot effect, which is sometimes you have to hear it from someone else. So my husband can suggest that we paint a wall in our house white, and I'll say no. And then the guy will suggest the exact same white paint, and I'll be like, what a great idea, right? Sometimes it has to come from someone else. So we joke that we Home Depot effect a lot of it. But really, we spend a lot of time working with the core team, working on that vocab, doing a lot of co-observations. What do you see? What does this mean in your building? And then backing out and staying in touch. And I think a big part of our job is encouraging educators not to be humble. So we always say, like, this is the most humble population of experts you will ever work with. Mm-hmm. And that humility is a huge barrier to collaboration, because these veteran educators and brand new educators who are just phenomenal and doing things every single day that, a book should be published about all of them, and no one will know, or their principal will know because they do their observations and feedback, and they will tell you, I have the best teachers in the city. And it can stop there because teachers don't have the extra time to share or to write that up, or they're not comfortable saying, hey, guess what I do that's really amazing. And so we do a lot of that. Of bragging and pulling it out and saying, this is why you're great, and let's put this vocab to it and pull it out of a silo.
Oh, I couldn't. I mean, my head's like hurting from shaking my head. Yes. Yes. It's So true. So interesting enough, I told you all before we were recording, I was in upstate New York last week working with a school, and I've been working with them all year. One of the things we did was an affirmation circle, right? We actually had people wrote affirmations about what they see their colleagues doing, but they couldn't see it, so it was on their back, right? And then what we did in the circle is we turned it around, and everyone chose one affirmation to read in front of the circle, and people like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, educators have a really hard time because of being humble, of owning when people affirm or we know we're doing something well, because one, we're afraid to get that light that everybody will be thinking that we're bragging, or we don't want nobody to see because I just want to go in the room and close my door. That's not how this work happens, right? And I agree 100% with what you said, because we all have to be in this work together, and we have to fail together, and we have to have successes together, because both of those processes are equally important, of saying, yeah, I tried that and it didn't work for my students. Tell me what you did that worked for you, or man, I did this and it had so much power, right? It's so funny because I have a text chain of about 20 practitioners from across the country. Joe is one of them, right? And we're constantly texting each other just what's happening and what's working and what's not working. And it's that, right? And matter of fact, right before I went to upstate New York, I texted Joe Brummer and said, Joe, tell me those 4 questions that you asked in the circle when we were at the Attachment Trauma Network. And he shares them, right? Yeah. That's the power. It's sharing this work. And I think what I hear you saying is it's an encouraging process to build up and affirm educators through NME. And then tell them, go back to your schools. This is time for you all to be the leaders, right? Yeah. That you are and can be within your building, and push this through the process of what it takes a school. So tell me about, what does S.I.T.E mean? I know it was S-I-T-E, but I didn't know what that meant. So what does it mean?
So it's sustainably informed trauma. You got it?
No.
Oh. So it's S is sustainably informed trauma education. Did I say that right? Yeah. And so really it was, what we were trying to do was just get that sustainability in there, because that was the biggest piece, was that we, a lot of the pre-work to this was us going to all the educators and saying, what do you want? And they said, do not show up and give us a one-off training, because we can hear it when it's a lovely day and we have bagels and coffee, but we want you to be there in real life, and we want to know what this looks like.
I think we were not shocked, but I think some of the greatest feedback we were like, would get in my classroom, come in, pause my lesson and say something. We were always like, no, that's not our place, but we'll happily give you feedback later about what, but teachers are like, help me practice what we preach.
Yeah. And so it's nothing earth shattering as far as the approach, but we just sort of laid out that if you really want to bring this into your building in a way that's going to live beyond one person hustling so hard, because again, sometimes I think that humility also comes from people being like, I don't want people to know I'm great because I can't do another thing in my day.
Join a committee, I can't.
Because there are those wonderful people where you're like, sign them up, they're awesome. But so we really just said, kind of, there were these 4 pieces that we felt like facilitated that strong implementation and efficacy. And so it was, get that core team going, have voices from around the building, even the person that's going to be least likely to adopt at that table, which I know as a principal, you will well understand. Do that professional development with staff that's ongoing, that they get those digestible doses over time, not just one big dump. Have on-site support, which is where those NME trainers come in, where somebody can, I always think of one teacher saying something to her class and then looking over her shoulder at her coworker and saying, that wasn't it, was it? And she's like, no, but you're good next time, but they wanted that live feedback or,
support.
Just modeling. And then the last piece was evaluation, like Halley said, but that dynamic duo-ness was put to strain when I would say, here's what we should measure. And Halley would say, if you ask a teacher to do that, they will come for you. And so this great ability of us to sort of talk through what's already existing in school data that we could help pull from, but also that people get feedback. Because a lot of times people said, we try all these new things, but we don't know if it's working or not. No one's fault. It's just nobody was assigned that task. So those 4 pieces were kind of the core to the S.I.T.E framework that we try to support schools in pulling in.
I mean, I feel like you guys are like affirming me as a principal, because I was like, wait, I had a core team. Wait, that's how we started. Then we went to the leadership team, and then it was about building sustainability. And then it was about ensuring that everybody had a part and everybody has innate genius, right? That includes the students. Every single student has innate genius. So do every single adult.
Yeah.
And what I may be good at, someone else may not be, and vice versa. And owning, right? Owning what we know we're confident in and learning in those spaces we're not. I tell people all the time, my assistant principal, we are polar opposites. I mean, literally polar opposites, similarly to my wife and I, polar opposites, right?
That's cool.
And yeah, definitely. My assistant principal color coded everything. Color coding gives me like super amount of stress because that isn't how my brain works. And like, I am the outgoing, relational, let's connect and laugh and also work and all of that stuff together. And so I think that's the key, right? Is finding those people in your building and seeing them for what they bring, not what they don't bring, right? And if everybody's bringing something, then we're moving forward. And so all of what you said had me like, okay, you like filled my bucket a little bit of my leadership when I was a principal, because those are things we have to do, because this work, you said it earlier, and I'm going to reiterate it. It's about adults, right? The byproduct is kids learning skills and being around adults that can help teach them in this social emotional health space. I don't use social emotional learning. It's about health. There you go, Katie. How you like that?
Love it.
Right. This is a health crisis. This is not a learning thing. But it's about learning these strategies, these ideas for ourselves first, so we can model and do them with kids. Because y'all, if we don't have regulated adults, we don't have regulated children. And right now we're in an adult regulation crisis, and it's happening across the globe, where we're wanting kids to change their quote unquote behavior when the adults, and this is no shame. I'm not shaming. No, it is harder now than I've ever seen it, right, in my almost 20-year career. Yeah. So what are some things that you would advise educators right now when they're like, okay, but it's so hard right now. Like I have so many people pulling me so many ways. I have so much to do, and I'm just overwhelmed all the time. What are some things you would tell them?
Yeah. Gosh.
Where to begin? First off, space for grace. I think if there's one thing we tell teachers is you're doing more than you think. And I think we always anchor back to, that Dr. Perry has a slide that talks about that our human superpower is connection and relation. And so I think we say it's the little things. Every time you positively use a student's name or just say their name, right? Yeah. That tiny drip it's life-changing, and we may not know it, right? We may not know what we said to a student when they were in our classroom as a third grade teacher did anything, but we all know how many adults we meet and we say, who's your favorite teacher? And they'll be like, my second grade teacher, Miss Adams. And she wouldn't know it, but like, I loved her. Right. And I think that is the one thing we say is every day you show up, you smile, you make a child feel safe, and you use their name. One, you're doing it. So celebrate yourself. I think we're constantly trying to say, like, find those ways to celebrate yourself. I don't know. I think we caution around self-care as like not the to-do, or I think it's become it's become a term, right? And it can mean a lot of things. And so we always compare sort of that, finding those tiny daily doses of regulation. So don't drink a pot of coffee on Monday, hoping it carries you through till Friday. So a lot of teachers they work until they need this huge day off, which you might need, right? But that's not regulation. That's like a survival technique. So we say, find these like 30-second moments, those daily cups of coffee that can help sustain you, and do it with your students, right? Like if you need to go outside, hopefully you work in a system that doesn't question why you're taking your kids outside. Which is where I get on my other soapbox and don't know what to tell teachers besides like, burn it down. But
hey, look at my shirt, right? This is my motto: unapologetic disruptor for good. I always said, if you can explain it and justify it and say why it benefits kids, and somebody tells you no, that is not you problem. That is somebody else's problem, and you're still doing what's right by kids. But Katie, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think too is, and this is something again that helps when it's top down as well as bottom up, but identifying realistic success, because I think sometimes we make these plans and we expect to see a second grader make 8 years of
Yeah.
growth in one day. And I think a lot of what Haley and I see is when teachers actually sit down and they get to talk about, this is what little Haley's good at, but here's where she could use some growth. And then the success isn't that little Haley made all that growth in a 2-week period, but it's saying, man, all the adults in this building got together and we focused on 2 things with little Haley and we stuck to our plan and we were consistent.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate. That's worth celebration. So I think too, sometimes those identifiers of success for educators are so far away that none of us feel good when we don't get to check off that checklist every so often.
We also push simplicity a lot. I think that's one of our biggest things is it's not a regulation plan for every student or a behavior plan. It's thinking about like what is patterned, repetitive, and rhythmic in your small group reading lesson, and for all 35 of your kids or 27 of your kids, right? Like what is critical for a few is going to be beneficial for the whole. So simplify it. I think about being a new teacher and the things that felt big, what my room looked like, how my classroom library ran, this, that, and then it all fell to the side, right? And I was like, they need to know what to expect from me. They need to know where their pencils are, and I need to pick which mountains I'm going to climb and which molehills I'm not. And I think it can be really hard in the day-to-day to back up and say, this is one simple thing I can do for all of us, and I can't do it all, and I don't need all of it.
It's so true, right? And it to me, I don't know if I grew up in the 90s, but there was a movie, The Hoosiers, right? And it was about a basketball team in Indiana. And the whole thing was just get back to basics.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think I mean the systems in which we operate have made education so complex that we forget about the basics of those good mornings, the I'm glad you're here, the pausing in a lesson to meet a kid where they are, right? And I'll tell you a very quick little story about when we first started this work when I was a principal, and there just weren't many elementary schools out there doing it, but I learned about trauma and knew I had to do something or I was committing educational malpractice. That's how strongly I felt when I learned the science, right? Like I have to do something differently. Yeah. And so when we started, it was challenging, right? To get going. It was challenging to get going. But then I had my school counselor. She said, Portel, we called each other by our last name. We were all athletes and that's just how we did. It was Portel. We went by last names. But she said, Portel, you've got to stand in front of the staff and tell them it's okay to stop teaching to meet the social and emotional health of a student in the moment. Yeah. And I'm like, Dr. Schroeder, I've said that. She's like, no, you've implied it, but you haven't explicitly said it. And so what Dr. Schroeder told me to do, I did because I called her Yoda. She was the keeper of all knowledge. When she spoke it was like divine. And so at the faculty meeting, I did that. And I said, I'm telling you, and it's not permission. I'm telling you, I want you. I'm in supporting you. I encourage you to meet the student where they are in the moment in a social and emotional health way. And they were like, wow. And I said, I don't care if I'm in an observation. I don't care if Dr. Battle, who was our superintendent, walks in. If a student needs us, we're going to stop right then and we're going to meet their need. It's sometimes just that, right? Just acknowledgement of, you can do this because we can do this together, and then modeling that process is so important. So admin, that's what I challenge you with. I'm learning right now that a lot of admin out there feel that by telling their staff to do this, they're going to do it, and then giving them consequences if they don't. See, this is a mindset shift we have to have. We have to give space for grace, in the words of Haley, right? To our staff too. We've got to meet them where they are. This isn't about punishment and shame for the adults. It's as much about meeting them where they are, and space and grace for ourselves is knowing where we are in that space to say, I'm struggling right now and I need some support, or man, I'm nailing it today. This was awesome. It's really important that from administrators to teachers to kids, this impacts community work when we see it through a sociological model of how we all play a role in the bigger picture. You can't see this.
No, we saw it.
It happened.
You're showing Parts out of your
Right.
head.
The podcast won't be able to see this, but if you're listening, you all, I'm not joking you. I just had hearts shooting out of my forehead
It was amazing.
on this platform that I'm streaming on, and I didn't even know you could do that. So that must have been really profound. I don't even know what I said. I'm gonna go back and listen to it, but nonetheless. So, I mean, how do you see all of this work playing out for administrators, right? Because I know we talk a lot about the educator, and I agree with you all. The idea of self-care, I'm going to be honest, I like want to punch self-care in the eye. Not really, but kind of, because we're trying to put the omen of fixing something on an individual when the system is putting pressure on the individual instead of going, what can we do differently so that person doesn't feel so much pressure, right? That's why I don't like self-care. I'm talking about collective care and changing systems because it's becoming that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps that we've put on communities for centuries, of just try harder or do this yourself, or and people are over it. But what do you see the role of administrators in this space?
I mean, we talk about that a lot, and I think first we feel empathy for administrators because the demands we see on them are huge. I mean, I think just time in the building, we see them hustling. You know, they want to work with students, but they have 10 meetings to go to. So I think one, we see again
They get
that
pulled
regulation
very much like this.
Yeah, so that regulation's hard for them as well. But I think, you know, we're fortunate that, like we said, we get to work with adults. So a lot of what we do is we say, you know, we're learning this neurosequential content for educator to student, but often one of the biggest PowerPoints, you know, those leverage points is administrator to staff. So if we're saying be patterned, repetitive, be predictable, offer as many of those, you know, expected stressors, controllable, dosed, as compared to those, you know, everything's changing on all fronts, the more supportive you're going to be. So I think we see those admin who really say, we use the 6 R's from Dr. Perry quite a bit, who say the 6 R's are good for us to do for students, but they're also good for us to do for our adults. I think we see that being huge, is saying I'm as impactful on the staff I'm supporting with that.
Yeah, I think an example, during the pandemic, when every day we all received different and new news, right? It was hard to predict what was going to happen, which led to this overall state of escalation for the world. But teachers, you know, we didn't know what to expect. One of the most, I think, regulating things one of our groups of admins did at that point, when they finally came back in person, but it was still very unpredictable, is they printed the weekly calendar at the beginning of the week and they handed it to teachers. And they said, because it's printed, I can't change it. And when it was virtual, a virtual agenda in Google Docs, they could shift things around. They could add something in. And by printing it, they had to commit to, like, this is what you can count on for this week. And I can't change it because it's hard copy. And that's simple. But that, you know, the brain is challenged by novelty. And so when we think of those arcs of stress that we learn about in our neurosequential model in education, there's resilient building stress. And, you know, where we love to talk about the neurosequential model in sport. And so much of sport is pushing your body to that limit of stress to grow. We love stress. It's good for us, certain types of stress, right? And so sometimes as an admin, it means sitting down with your team and those who support you and saying, in our community, what can we offer that is resilience building? And what is going to fall under this red arc of sensitizing? And we can't maybe control that, but we can be aware of it. And then we can figure out, what do we have to potentially offset that? What can we offer in a patterned, predictable way? One of our amazing advanced trainers, there's a team of them, Heather and Megan, they recently taught me the term, the random acts of intervention. And I think sometimes that's what this work turns into, is these like random acts of intervention that, because they're unpredictable to students and unpredictable to teachers, it's more dysregulating than supportive. Whereas if it was planned by admin, utilized by teachers, made, you know, very obvious to students and teachers, it would be very impactful. So I think as much as admin can act as that buffer of predictability, I think that's the best thing we can do. Even really bad things that we can predict become less stressful. And so I think that's what we say, is help put in systems that allow teachers to feel comfortable meeting kids where they are, and help put in systems that allow the stressors we know we can't control to be buffered by something predictable.
So powerful. And I when I share predictability, I always say to adults, we are the greatest form of predictability if we're doing our own work, right? If we're taking care and doing our own work, we can be the greatest source of predictability for other human beings, whether I'm an admin, whether I'm a teacher, whoever I am, right?
Yeah.
So when when a kid shows up in the morning and they don't know Mr. Portell that they're going to get, that in itself sends a student into a dysregulation state, because it's like, is it happy, Mr. Portell? Is it angry, Mr. Portell? Is it sad, Mr. Portell? Who am I getting today, right? And as educators and as admin, I had to be cognizant of that. And it's okay to be all of those things, but you have to be able to communicate that, right? So when I was going through, my mom passed away several years ago, and I was a principal. And I would say, you all, I'm having a really hard day today. I'm grappling with my grief, and it's just a really hard day, right? I would say that in a staff meeting, or I would say that to a staff member. So let them know, listen, it's not you, it's me. I'm trying to regulate, but I'm having a hard time because I'm still processing all of these things, right? So it's not about not doing those things. It's what avenue do you have to be able to express those? So you set that clarity for whomever you're interacting with. So much amazing stuff, you all. And I'm so glad you're here. So glad you're doing this work. So glad you have the dynamic duo of public health education. And if you're an OT out there and you need two sisters, I'm sure they could put you into the adoptive process and have you come on as their, or Haley, you can go ahead and register for those classes and get that degree while you got some extra time, right? But anyway, you all, what do you want educators to know from you right now? Like in this moment in time, what do you want them to know from you?
I would say stay with it. I think, like you said, we're seeing a high level of adult burnout, but just stay in it, stay with it, but also take care of yourself. I think there's a big part of educators I watch that are trying to lift everything for everyone. And I worry that that's too much. And so I think, for me, it would just be, I don't want them to leave. I think kids need great adults. I think you said it earlier, we do so much by showing up for our kids. So I think don't leave, but also we see you. You should be paid more.
Yeah. I mean, I want to say something really like emotive because I think teachers are superheroes. But yeah, I think we want teachers to stay, but we don't want them to stay in situations that are harmful to them. How many educators are like, myself included, I was 100% until I had kids, or I was 100% until I had a parent pass away. And then I realized like I didn't have enough for both, and I don't want to feel that way. And so I think if you are an educator who is engaging in, trauma-informed, brain-based work, getting all these tools, I think I can say this, and I recognize I was not great at it. Try to think about the systems that you can put in place proactively that regulate without it being entirely relational. I managed my classroom solely on my relationships with my students. So if I had a substitute teacher, things got weird. And if I was having an off day, it was immediate for my students. And that wasn't okay, because then I didn't feel okay taking vacation days, or on sick days, I'd rather come in sick than write subplans or get the note about which of my students couldn't make it through the day. And I realized, wow, that felt really good to me. That wasn't what was best for them or for me. And so when I got this content, I realized the relational piece is huge, but there's a piece before it. And that comes before relationships, and that systems and structures and routines and rhythm and pattern. And if we put that in place, we get to have deeper relationships, better connection, healthier boundaries, and we don't feel like it's all entirely reliant on us having a good day. And I think it helps with that emotional burnout and like actual physical burnout. So I think figure out what can help regulate yourself and your students outside of the relational piece, so that you can have an off day without feeling like you let a little person down, or a big person, or a whole school if you're a leader. So I wish I had learned that sooner, and I wish I was better about it. But there are people who are really good at it, and they're those really organized teacher who you walk into their room and you know where the scissors go without having to ask. And that's who you should check in with.
Well, I have to say, I would not have been that teacher, right? But that honestly was one of the most profound things I've heard in a long time that I hadn't thought about, right? Because it really is about that getting kids into that rhythm and that understanding of what's happening, even if you're not there. So thank you for your time, both Dr. Katie Lohmiller, and I didn't call you doctor before, and I appreciate that you didn't fix that because you owned it and I should have given it to you. And Halley, thank you for being here. And as always, you all, please go into the world and do something awesome.
I feel like I shouldn't breathe.
Another emoji.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
You just did
Did you
another
see
emoji.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, we're still live, but we're not recording. So anyway, see, I have my recording over here and then the live stuff. So, thank you all who came today or came tonight. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jack. All of the folks that came tonight, the 64 of you that are still on here. Much appreciated for you being here and hearing from these two amazing practitioners who are literally changing the face of education for many kids through what they do, both with the Educational Access Group and the Neurosequential Network. And next week, I do not have the date. It will not be Monday. We will have the 100th episode, which I'm really excited about. And for those of you who are on here, not on the podcast because they're not going to hear this because I already stopped recording, but those of you who are on here live, it will be actually the author team that I am a part of that will be will be publishing our book with Harvard Education Press coming out in don't pay attention to that. It's actually the spring of 2025. It will be all of the authors are going to come on and we're just going to have an amazing conversation. And it'll be next week. I'm pretty sure, just not on Monday. So stay tuned for that. And much appreciated for all of you being here tonight and for Katie and Halley for being here as well. If you all will stay on, and I will wish all of you that are on live stream well and have a great week, and I will see you next week.